We are about 3 weeks away from the 2024 NFL draft, and there's so many possibilities, so many rumors. It's Lions season right now. We figured we'd kind of parse through what we believe, what we don't believe in a one-round NFL mock draft today. I will be picking from evens. Danny will be picking from odds. We're not going to waste any time. Danny, you're on the clock. Pick number 1 to the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, and you kind of made reference to it. This is probably going to be the penultimate mock that we release. We might do one out, NFL draft week, but we're trying to, gauge the information that we know now. Obviously, a couple big free agency moves. Obviously, a big trade there with Stefon Diggs going from the Bills to the Texans. Felt like a good time to get into an NFL mock, but we know what's going to happen at first overall with the Justin Fields trade, with the approach throughout the draft cycle. The number 1 overall pick has been and will end up being Caleb Williams of the USC Trojans. I mean, when we're talking about the quarterback prospect himself, obviously people know at this point for the last 2 years what he was able to do at USC, Heisman Trophy campaign 2 seasons ago. And when you're watching this guy play, it's hard not to see the Kyler Murray, the Patrick Mahomes level of creation out of the pocket. So when you're at first overall here, you do have the 9th overall pick. You've already made a very good weapons core there with DJ Moore, with Keenan Allen already on the roster. You got to plug in the final piece, and that's going to be that franchise quarterback on a rookie deal with Caleb Williams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes without saying that Caleb Williams is great inside of structure, but people talk about the outside of structure stuff so much that we forget that he can also do everything that Bo Nix and Michael Penix and these, basic drop back and throw where it needs to go thing. So people talk about Caleb Williams, so he's going to be a bust because he's a little bit quirky personality wise. I think it's completely hooey, basically. Caleb Williams is walking into a situation that very few first overall picks get to walk into with the weapons at his disposal. So the number 2 overall pick, definitely a lot of debate. We got some word that it might even be a 3-horse race instead of just a 2-horse race here. Drake May and Jaden Daniels, to me, is the 2 guys it's between, but we also have heard word that JJ McCarthy might be factoring in. I would imagine that's only in a trade down scenario, probably not in a, they would actually take him 2nd overall. It's hard to parse through exactly what's true right now because I've heard Jaden Daniels to the Commanders from Colin Cowherd. He talked about that, I believe, the other day. It's all but a foregone conclusion that they're going to take Jaden Daniels. I've also heard the speculation that, moving on from Sam Howell, trading him to the Seahawks, apparently like the Rams and other teams were involved in the Sam Howell dealings. Drake May and Sam Howell are very close. Again, you could read into the Marcus Mariota backup quarterback signing as potentially somebody that would back up Jaden Daniels because they're of a similar, play style. To me, I do think the Jaden Daniels smoke is real, so I am going to go with Jaden Daniels. We are doing this from a predictive standpoint. I personally would take Drake May, but I have a feeling that the Commanders will take Jaden Daniels come draft night.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it kind of comes down to, like I said, I think at this point, it's probably, like 45% Drake, 45% Jaden, like 10% JJ is about where I would kind of, level off the odds if I had to guess right now. But realistically, when you're comparing, for the most part, the 2 most likely picks with Drake May and Jaden Daniels, the other aspect too that I think is kind of underreported is, I mean, where is Cliff Kingsbury coming from his first time in the NFL? He's coming from Arizona.
Coming from the Cardinals. They had Kyler Murray. I also, too, we've speculated that the Minnesota Vikings are all in on Drake May. Do the Minnesota Vikings make this trade with the Houston Texans, knowing that Drake May is going to be the 2nd pick in the draft, right? Maybe they're all in on JJ McCarthy or Jaden Daniels as well. But to me, I view that Drake May Minnesota Vikings connection as the reason Minnesota made that move. And they would only do that if they know that the Commanders are all in on Jaden Daniels. So for me, there's a lot of things pointing to Jaden Daniels being the pick at number 2 overall for the Washington Commanders. So you're on the clock here with the New England Patriots. Are you going to stick and pick a quarterback? Are you going to trade down for a roster that needs a lot of things? What are you thinking here?
I personally, in my philosophy, always want to get the young quarterback and build around him, especially when you have an opportunity to get said young quarterback. You can make the case, like you said, they need a lot of things where trading down, maybe they entertain the Vikings package of 11, 23, 2025 first plus. And I think that's a very, very good package if you're New England, if you want to get multiple assets. But the problem here is that I can't see a world where they're staring a guy like Drake May, a young 22-year-old quarterback, 6'5", 220 pounds, mobility that he has, arm talent that he has, and he doesn't see, and they don't see the quarterbacks that they have to compete with in the AFC. If you're seeing Drake May and you're that team that doesn't have one of those, Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes aliens in the world, You have to be able to get the next guy that can compete with those aliens. And to me, that guy is Drake May. So I understand there's a lot of speculation. They could trade down. They could veer towards a guy like JJ McCarthy. But in terms of archetype for what competes in the AFC, I think Drake May embodies that a lot more than, to be honest, probably everybody in this quarterback class.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think if Drake May were standing there at 3 overall to the Patriots, their phone would be ringing off the hook from the New York Giants, from the Minnesota Vikings, from the Denver Broncos, from the Las Vegas Raiders. All of these teams. Obviously, we know the two teams, I would say, the only two that would actually have a chance of getting Drake May are the Giants, because they don't have far to go. The New England Patriots might want to stay inside the top 6 to potentially take JJ McCarthy or potentially grab one of these top wide receivers, or the Vikings because they have more draft assets than the Broncos and the Raiders. They're also not in the same conference too, which would maybe factor in for the New England Patriots as well. So all in all, I would say that the Patriots, if they don't stick and pick Drake May or Jaden Daniels, whichever guy ends up being on the board, the Giants at 6 and the Vikings at 11 are probably the only two trade down scenarios, in my opinion, that exist reasonably, unless the Broncos or the Raiders are going to sell like 3 future ones to go up and get their future franchise quarterback. But again, Drake May is a young quarterback, needs a little bit of development, needs a little bit of time. Let Jacoby Brissett take the beating with the bad roster this year. You can redshirt Drake May the entire season, build around him this year in the draft, let those young players develop. Maybe next year in free agency, go out and trade for a big-time receiver, go out and sign a big-time receiver.
Trade
maybe
for T. Higgins right now
becomes available. Maybe one of these other high-end wide receivers don't sign with their teams. Probably not a CeeDee Lamb or a Justin Jefferson, but even like a T. Higgins or a Brandon Ayuk potentially could be available for you.
Well, the other option is, again, we haven't really heard much in the trade front of T. Higgins for a while. I mean, I could very well see a scenario where come day 2 of the NFL draft, the Patriots are able to acquire T. Higgins for maybe a second-round pick, like the early second that they have, and maybe like a third-round pick swap. I really do see that being in the cards. Cincinnati, obviously motivated from a financial standpoint, and who knows, maybe we see Cincinnati, go trade up for a receiver or go trade up for a tight end and make T. Higgins available. But we'll find out in the rest of this mock draft what we kind of project. You are on the clock here, 4th overall, Arizona Cardinals. Another big-time trade spot, another potential spot to take, a Marvin Harrison Jr., another receiver in this class. What kind of direction do you lean?
Yeah, I think the Vikings obviously would be calling the Cardinals to be able to make a move up for JJ McCarthy here, probably in this scenario. But to me, I think it makes way more sense to make that move with the Chargers, who want to trade down, I think, more than the Arizona Cardinals would. Not to mention the best player in the draft being on the board at their biggest position of need makes a lot of sense here. So as much as I think the Cardinals are definitely a spot that could trade down here, I tend to believe that they're just going to take Marvin Harrison. He fills the biggest need that they have for him. My comp for him played for the Cardinals for a number of years. He's Larry Fitzgerald. He does everything that you could possibly ask for a number 1 wide receiver. He's elite in every single area. Contested catches, speed, route running, everything. Off the field, apparently he works really hard. He's a very smart kid. So there's no reason not to take this guy with a top 5 pick, in my opinion. If you're the Cardinals and you go all the way down to 11, you might be caught holding the bag in a receiver class that does drop off after those first 3 guys. Yeah, they could go down with the Vikings and then trade back up and try and get one of the top 3 receivers, but it's like, why get cute here? It's the whole Family Guy mystery box thing. Just take the best receiver in the class.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned your comp for Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously big-time Cardinals legend. My comp for Marvin Harrison Jr. also played for the Arizona Cardinals. The unfortunate part of that is he was washed when he played for the Arizona Cardinals. So getting a prime A.J. Green rather than, a washed end-of-career last 2 years A.J. Green, definitely going to be a lot more ideal. But all jokes aside, man, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a freak of nature. He graded out as generational for both of us. And if this guy doesn't become a perennial 1,300, 1,400-plus yard receiver at the next level, I would be extremely shocked. You mentioned the Chargers potentially being a trade spot at 5, and I do think we end up seeing a trade done. I'm going to project it as maybe 11, 23, and we'll say a 1-for-2 pick swap maybe?
I don't think they'd have to give up their first and 25 personally, just because the Chargers seem motivated to move down. So I think maybe you could probably get away with, 11, 23, 108, and then maybe you get, 140 back or something like that. Like, I don't think
they get a pick back.
Okay, maybe they give up a third. I trade details not really relevant in this mock. 11 and 23 are going to the Chargers is really all that matters for a 1-round mock here.
For sure. So we'll just give it like that. Very easy. Obviously, don't go in the comment section saying, oh, it costs much less. It costs much more. Like, we're having fun here. We're doing a 1-round mock. with that being said, 5th overall, I think it's pretty clear if you're making that aggressive move up, you will be taking a quarterback. The one quarterback I do feel like left has a chance to go in the top 10 would be JJ McCarthy. And I do feel like from a schematic fit standpoint, the mobility that he has, the arm talent that he has, the youth factor that he has playing in a pro style system there in Michigan would fit like a glove for what Kevin O'Connell wants to do from a development standpoint.
Not to mention the mentor that he would have at quarterback. It came into the league at the same age, didn't go to a good situation like JJ McCarthy would be doing. So Sam Darnold gets a chance to prove himself, maybe earn himself a contract in free agency next year. And he can probably say, hey, dude, I've been where you've been. I went to a shitty franchise that did nothing to build around me. You are in a very unique situation here where you have the best receiver in the league. You have a great number 2 receiver. You have one of the best tight ends in the league. You have a good offensive line. So JJ McCarthy could sit 8, 10, 12 weeks behind Sam Darnold, depending on how well he's playing, and learn the NFL, learn the Kevin O'Connell system. And I do think it's definitely one of the better fits. I believe they want Drake May, but JJ McCarthy might be their consolation prize if they say have Caleb ranked QB1, Drake May ranked QB2, and JJ ranked QB3 or something. I'm sure they're comfortable getting whichever one they can get. And that's why they made that trade to get in striking distance. And we haven't seen them make a subsequent trade yet to get up into the top 5, because I do think they might be comfortable with both players. So I'm on the board here. I mean, we heard some bullshit report that Malik Neighbors is too high maintenance for a big city. I tend to believe that the Giants could be one of these teams that would prefer Rome Odunze, because they don't have a lot of team leaders on offense, especially knowing that Saquon is now gone to the Philadelphia Eagles. He was a captain for them. Their offensive line has some leaders, but Daniel Jones is coming off of an injury. You don't exactly know what's going to happen here. I'm going to mix it up here because I do think that these 3 receivers are interchangeable for most NFL teams. Some teams are going to have Harrison 1. Some teams are going to have Neighbors 1. Some teams are going to have Harrison potentially 3. Some teams are going to have Odunze 2. They're going to be all over the place. So for me, I do believe the Giants need a prototypical X wide receiver who can get open, who can separate, who can make contested catches, and brings that maturity, that leadership level. So I'm actually going to take Rome Odunze over Malik Neighbors for the New York Giants. And the other underrated thing about this is that if they do address the quarterback position on day 2, potentially, they could maybe even pair him with his college quarterback.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be a really fun pairing as well, potentially, if they got Michael Penix in the 2nd round. There's been reports maybe he sneaks into the 1st round, but honestly, the vibe I get is basically the same vibe that we got from Hendon Hooker, where like everybody's like, oh, loaded quarterback class at the top, like he could sneak in the back of the 1st round, whatever. And obviously he ends up going, round 3, I believe?
Yep. Yeah, that's basically what ended up happening there. So Malik Neighbors might be a guy that people are, just ringing the phones off the hook for right now. But what are you thinking with the Tennessee Titans here?
Yeah, so prior to the big time money deal that they gave Calvin Ridley, this was a fun spot for me to potentially have Malik Neighbors go to. And I still don't think it's off the table, because if you're looking at the context of the situation from a long-term weapon standpoint, yes, in year 1, DeAndre Hopkins, Treylon Burks, Calvin Ridley, I think can suffice as a wide receiver trio for the Titans roster trying to develop Will Levis. But I kind of see that, and I'm like, okay, well, long-term, 2025, 2026, DeAndre Hopkins most likely going to be out. That's putting a lot in the Treylon Burks development basket. And if Calvin Ridley is your only viable wide receiver, then that's a big time for the development for Will Levis. However, I keep coming back to the fact that their starting left tackle is currently Nicholas Petit-Frere, and they do have a solid, wide receiver trio on paper, at least for this year. So I can see them taking the left tackle now, pairing him with Callahan, and then potentially attacking the number 1 wide receiver next year when either Hopkins or, we'll have more information on Treylon Burks if he works out or not. So for me, I think this is Joe Alt, and then you either grab a day 2 wide receiver or you potentially further that for next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's too difficult to look at their current immediate needs, and you see 2 players who are probably graded similarly. And also too, like Malik Neighbors sliding a little bit in the draft. He did have a weapon incident in New Orleans. Maybe teams look at him as like potentially a guy with like some attitude issues or whatever the case is. Again, what I'm going to do is going to indicate that Malik Neighbors should not be on the board right now. I am trading up with the New York Jets to go.
I was going to trade up with the Chargers.
You want to trade up with the Chargers?
I wanted to offer a trade with the Chargers.
Ooh, okay. Who do you think is more likely to make this move? Let's talk, because I think both teams could really use this player in Malik Neighbors.
What I come back to with the Jets is because they don't have their 2nd round pick, I think it's less likely they move. The reason being because they could go tackle, they can go wide receiver. There's no real set need, I would say, for that Jets roster, and I can see them kind of playing the board and taking best player available. For the Chargers, man, you just made that trade down. You just got extra capital to move down for that quarterback equity that Minnesota traded up for. Now you got to get Justin Herbert an actual wide receiver one. So, like, I think the Chargers landing spot makes more sense, but you do control the Jets and you do control the Falcons. So if you can make a better trade from the Jets, then I'm cool with that either. I think both make sense.
I'm going to make the trade with the Chargers because you're right. And if it became a bidding war, the Jets don't have the horses to compete with the Chargers, because the Chargers, if they had to, could give them 23 and, get 43 back or something if they wanted to. But let's do a 11 for 8 swap, obviously. And then let's give them, it's going to be
37
pricey.
for 74.
Yeah, give them 37 for 74. I think that's what it's going to cost, man. If the Jets are ringing the phone off the hook, and maybe even other teams too, New Orleans might be trying to come up, Indianapolis might be trying to come up, Denver even potentially could be trying to come up. So yeah, we're going to make it semi-expensive, unfortunately, for the Chargers, but you still pocket the 23rd pick in your trade down with the Vikings. You got some other future capital as well, and you get yourself a future number 1 receiver here.
Yeah, I think this would be a smash of a draft if you're a Chargers fan, to be honest. Trading down from 5 to where you could potentially get a Marv or Malik Neighbors there anyways, and then still end up with one of the top 3 receivers at 8 with the extra first-round pick in town. A+.
So we're up next here with the Chicago Bears. A definite possibility that they would want to trade down. Obviously annoyed probably that they just got sniped on Malik Neighbors. Looking at the board, I mean, Brock Bowers is definitely, I would say, the best available player. I would assume if somebody is trading up, they'd want to maybe get ahead of a team like the Jets, who could be in on Brock Bowers. Cornerback 1 is also a possibility that could be a trade up potential here, getting ahead of the Falcons there as well. The Bears probably wouldn't take a cornerback. I mean, I control the Saints. I would say they would be potentially a team that would be interested in Bowers, but I think they're probably content to see what kind of tackle prospect falls to them. So I'll let you roll with it. I also control the Bengals as well, but to me, I don't think the Bengals would go quite up that far. If Bowers had fallen to them naturally, I could see them doing this, but I don't know if they would go up into the top 10 for him.
Yeah, or even if he falls like 12 to 14 range and they want to trade up then, because they could still potentially leverage T. Higgins for a D2 pick, maybe a high second round pick, and then potentially use the extra pick that they have to move up for Bowers. But for the most part, I would say, like you said, in the top 10, it's just not really feasible at that point. The Bears, like you said, would really want to be trading out of this pick because there's still, guys like, Talisa Fuaga, obviously Brock Bowers. Like, there's guys that teams would have interest in. It's really tough to formulate a deal on a team that would want to jump potentially the Jets for Bowers here. So, I think they might be left holding the bag here. They may have to just go with their best defensive player. And if that's the case, like, we keep coming back to the well of Dallas Turner being the first defensive player off the board, and it just feels like a really natural fit. You get your franchise quarterback with Caleb Williams. He already has, although I think you can add a receiver on day 2, he already has at least a good nucleus there with DJ Moore, with Keenan Allen, with Cole Kmet, that if you can potentially go the Texans route, get your franchise signal call and your franchise edge rusher in the same draft, if Dallas Turner lives up to his upside, I really do feel like you can look back at this draft and say, oh my God, like they got 2 top 5 players.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense there. It's also a defensive head coach, right? Matt Eberflus probably wants a guy to pair with Montez Sweat there in the long term. So yeah, I think it's possible they could go with Byron Murphy from Texas, the defensive tackle as well. I think, like you said, though, they would probably be very motivated to get out of that pick. And if the receivers are off the board, they also could add somebody to their offensive line to grab a Troy Fatuanu or whatever, add him inside to kick into guard or, play him at wherever. It sounds like he's got some positional flexibility. So I'm on the board here with the Jets. The debate, I think, will be, do you take Brock Bowers or do you take an offensive lineman? And again, Troy Fatuanu, Talisa Fuaga, any of those guys probably fit. I think Fatuanu makes the most sense because you do theoretically have a good offensive line on paper right now with Tyron Smith coming in, Morgan Moses coming in, but you do kind of need somebody in addition to Elijah Vera Tucker, who you already have, with some position flexibility. To me, I think Fatuanu is the right pick. But I think we're doing this predictively. I do think they would take Bowers as the board as it falls right now, because I do think you're getting a tier break in terms of an overall talent. You get yourself a second weapon You're not forced to reach at receiver on day in your third round pick. And this offensive line class, I think there's some good options that you can get inside at guard with some tackle flexibility that are like small school guys. Like I've noticed, because the Bucks obviously need the same thing that the Jets do. I've noticed the round 2, round 3, round 4 guys at offensive line, at offensive tackle as well, are actually a little bit deeper. So I think that the Jets would maybe opt to go for the pass catcher here with Brock Bowers and hope that they can fill their offensive line needs later on in the draft. Again, you don't only have one draft pick, and how often are you going to get, in my opinion, a top 3 to 5 player in this draft at 10th overall?
Yeah, and I mean, it comes back to the fact, do we really trust Nathaniel Hackett in designing an offense to get Brock Bowers that ideal optimal usage? But I mean, at the same time, you got a franchise quarterback coming off a torn Achilles in the last years of his career. You may as well do everything you can to get as many weapons onto the field. And Brock Bowers obviously would be a big time upgrade over what they currently have there with Conklin. And to be honest, I think he could be, like you mentioned, the number 2 focal point in this passing game as soon as he steps on the field for them. So Brock Bowers at 10th overall. I mean, I think he's a better prospect, to be honest, than Kyle Pitts was, and Kyle Pitts went 4th. So you can argue that Brock Bowers going 10 is a good value. But although Pitts went 4 in that class specifically because of the athletic traits as well, I would say. So it makes sense why the difference is there for them.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even get to see Bowers test. I think he's holding some kind of like pro day or workout at some point in April here. But you're on the board here with the Falcons. I'll just give you my opinion. You obviously do whatever you want. I think they would sprint for corner 1, whoever they think it is.
I was just gonna say I'm sprinting for Quinyon Mitchell here because he feels like the type of corner that you would want to have next to an AJ Terrell. AJ Terrell, your lockdown guy. Quinyon Mitchell, obviously the size, the speed, the fluidity, the natural athleticism that he has. He's going to be your cornerback too on that team that is already going to be so good offensively. If you can get 2 lockdown level corners on that defense, and it doesn't have to be a top 10 defense in the NFL, but if it's a top 20 level defense and Kirk Cousins, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, good offensive lines doing their thing on the other end, I really do feel like the Falcons are going to be a playoff team this upcoming year. So Quinyon Mitchell, love that at the 11th overall pick. The Broncos on the clock here at 12, and depending on what they feel the quarterback position, they could either take one here, could trade down, or maybe they gear towards a position player. I'll let the ball be in your court.
Yeah, they're one of the hardest teams to figure out because are they going to take Michael Penix? Are they going to take Bo Nix here? We believe Bo Nix is definitely a fit for what they would like to do offensively, but I don't think that they would be inclined to take Bo Nix this high in the NFL draft because I don't think they need to. I think if they wanted Bo Nix, and again, this is a dangerous, slippery slope here, would you want to trade down a couple picks to get Bo Nix at a more appropriate range? I would say probably not. If you like the quarterback enough to take him in the first round, you should probably just take him at 12. So that's what I'm going to end up doing here. I am going to give them Bo Nix. I think, again, in an ideal world, if they were picking 22 in this draft instead of 12, they'd probably feel a little bit more comfortable taking Bo Nix. But at the same time, it's like if you trade down, there's the risk that the Raiders take Bo Nix. There's the risk that the Seahawks potentially take Bo Nix, or the Rams potentially take Bo Nix, or some of these other teams. So for me, if you like the quarterback enough to take him in round 1, just take him at 12. That's the thing that we saw with the Giants and Daniel Jones back when they had 2 1s in 2019. So for me, again, the Broncos, if they don't go with a quarterback, like they're so hard to pin another need on. You could go with a Latu at edge. You could go with wide receiver 4. Again, they're kind of just stuck between a rock and a hard place where they're picking because they're not really getting the best player available at any position because the draft kind of tapers off after the first 10 or so players.
How similar does this 2024 quarterback class remind you of the 2021 one in the sense of where the quarterbacks went off the board? Because if we're looking at it right now, 1, 2, 3 went in the 2021 draft. Obviously, back then with Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and with Trey Lance. You have another quarterback going in the top 15. Right? I guess Fields fell further than McCarthy did in this instance. And then Bo Nix is kind of like the Mac Jones of the class where, okay, maybe, is kind of the 5th of the options, but pairs in a good situation there. Obviously, we saw what Mac did in his rookie season. He didn't quite develop from that. I think Bo Nix is a better prospect because of what he can do out of structure. And I also think he has better athletic traits going to the next level. Out of structure, better arm, in my opinion. And I really do feel like he can be that cerebral level passer that we saw with Mac prior to him really getting overwhelmed by the lack of situation with the Patriots in his second year on. So this is kind of like the re-roll at that Mac Jones, only I think this is going to work out because you do have Sean Payton as a good guidance for him.
Yeah, and you have some weapons there with Dolchich, with Sutton, with Javonte
Yep.
Williams and such. And Bo Nix, I mean, he doesn't get enough credit for being one of the best quarterbacks under pressure we've really seen. And that comes when you have 60 college starts under your belt. It's almost like we talk about this all the time. It's like, oh, if only one of these leagues could turn into like a developmental league for the NFL, like the UFL or all these other leagues. It's almost as if Bo Nix played in one of those leagues for like 2 years at Oregon because he got to refine his skill set, learn how to read coverages and all that kind of stuff. Teams are going to like the maturity aspect of him. And he actually, I know Daniel Jeremiah has made this comp too. Above the shoulders, he kind of feels a little bit like Jalen Hurts. I know Jalen Hurts obviously a completely different play style, but in terms of the competitiveness, the football IQ, the drive, and that kind of stuff, Bo Nix is a guy I find myself quite excited about to get a value on in rookie drafts from a dynasty perspective, because I feel like people just look at him and they're like, 24-year-old quarterback, don't want him.
Hey, I mean, Bo Nix is a much better athlete than people want to give him credit for. So, like, although he's not Jalen Hurts level, I really do see credence to that. Maybe potentially a, Dak Prescott level rushing level we've seen at the next level, 200 to 300 yards, 5 to 6 touchdowns per year. I really do see that being in the range of outcomes. I'm on the clock here at 13th overall. Obviously, from the Raiders' perspective, their division rival takes the quarterback ahead of them, and that's the other risk, of course. If you're the Broncos, if you trade back and the Raiders take the quarterback you like, you're going to have to be playing against that guy 2 times per year for the next 10-plus years, potentially. So I'd like them taking their guy there at 12. 13th, however, because there's no quarterback on the board, because I really feel like the Raiders can go a number of directions, I want to propose a deal. The Cincinnati Bengals are picking at 18th overall. Talisa Fuaga is available for them. They need a tackle, especially with the upside that Talisa Fuaga has, and they run the risk that if they stick and pick at their pick, all of Fatanu, Mims, Olu could be gone there, with obviously the Raiders, the Saints, and with the Seahawks potentially picking above them, or even the Jaguars picking above them. So I will propose maybe 18 plus their second for 13, so they can move up, and whether it's Fuaga or, I'll let you make that pick, obviously, because you control them. The ball's in your hand.
Yeah, let's make a deal here, because I think that the Bengals could use some offensive line help. And this would be definitely a situation where the Raiders probably want out of that pick. They could go with like a Byron Murphy or something like that. I think they'd probably get like 112 back on top of that, like just to balance it out a little bit. Seems a little high, a little steep for a 5-pick discrepancy. But yeah, let's see if that gets it done. In the real life NFL, I think that'd be probably about accurate there. In terms of which offensive lineman you want to go after, I think Fuaga represents like kind of the upside case. Troy Fatuanu is the versatile piece that you can kind of use whatever you need him to. And then Fashanu, I feel like he's a little bit slept on right now. Like he was expected to be a top 5 pick in this class, and he hasn't really done much to say that he has fallen in the eyes of the NFL. So I'm actually going to go with Fashanu as the offensive tackle. To me, he's one of these guys that's been in the public eye, the NFL draft scouts' eye, in the media for so long that it feels like we're kind of just getting lower on this guy. And then come the NFL draft time, he gets drafted where he's supposed to. Kind of reminds me a little bit of like Andrew Thomas, where he was expected to be a really high pick. Everybody thought he was going to slide 4th tackle off the board, and then he ends up going off the board as the best tackle, or the first tackle taken in that draft.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of this situation, I would say, I think any of these guys could play inside for the most part. Obviously, Olu projects mostly as a tackle, but if you need him to potentially play left guard in year 1, I think he can definitely do it for you. Because, realistically, in year 1, your starting tackles are going to be the Brown brothers there, obviously, with Orlando and with Trent. I know they're not related, but they both have the same last name and both play offensive line, so it's funny. You got 2 behemoths there. Having that next guy to develop next to them, play him at guard initially, let him be your future at left tackle, because realistically, Orlando Brown and Trent Brown is not stopping me from getting the next franchise protector for Joe Burrow. We know Joe Burrow is going to be here for the long haul. Why not get that next guy, 21, 22 years old, especially at, a deflated cost, to be honest. Usually a guy with the athletic traits that Olu Fashanu has is a top 10 NFL draft pick. Because of how good this tackle class is, I really do feel like there's value at each of those tackles respectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on the clock here again because I am picking for evens. The Saints probably would have just plug and played Olu Fashanu, but it's okay because they're going to grab Talisa Fuaga here.
Yep.
I think offensive tackle is easily their biggest need. Their quarterback situation's kind of rough with Derek Carr. Their wide receiver position could use some more bodies outside of Chris Olave. But to me, it's like your offensive line, you're an old school coaching staff that has a pretty archaic old school scheme. They're going to really value the offensive line position. I personally, if you ask me, and I know I'm not the best person to ask about the Saints' future because I don't like this team as a Buccaneers fan. I think they're going down in flames this year. I think everybody's getting fired. Derek Carr is going to be gone, and they're going to want to rebuild for the future. So at least you give yourself a saving grace by taking a foundational position group in this draft. And then next year you can have some fun, maybe go after a quarterback, go after some wide receivers, or take wide receivers later on in this class even too.
Speaking of having some fun, grabbing some receivers, we've seen from the Colts how much they value athleticism with their first round pick in particular. And we've seen it multiple times. I mean, the Colts always end up with one of the freakiest athletes in the class at their pick. One of the freaky athletes at their one position of need goes off the board with Quinyon Mitchell. They go with another one. Brian Thomas Jr. is, in my opinion, the perfect fit for this offense. You got your possession guy with Michael Pittman. You got your slot with Josh Downs. Get Brian Thomas, his third level ability. Basically, just imagine what Alec Pierce is doing, but actually getting a good player to fill that role and be a consistent part of the offense on a week-to-week basis. And I think Brian Thomas would fit like a glove. He's got the profile that goes higher in the NFL draft, tested out athletically, 17 touchdowns in the SEC. This is kind of a projection, I would say, of his draft range, because I see a lot of people saying, oh, maybe he goes 20th overall, 25th overall. I think the NFL is going to value him as a top 20 overall pick, and he could potentially sneak into the top 15. So why not mock it out here?
Yeah, no, I think it's fair to say that the high end of Brian Thomas's range is potentially even higher than 15. Like I could see him going as high as 10th overall, potentially to the Jets, or even a little bit higher than that, 9th overall to the Bears. Like, yeah. I don't think I would take him that high. I think he belongs in the late first round area, but I could see the teams, like you said, what do they value? Size, athleticism, big schools. Like that's Colts to a T. So I could definitely see them going with the Brian Thomas Jr. pick there. As much as I would probably hate this as a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, because I mean, Fatu Anu's on the board. I mean, everybody's going to make this connection. The offensive coordinator, I believe, for the Washington Huskies is on the Seattle Seahawks staff. He's obviously worked with Fatu Anu. They have an offensive line need, especially in the interior. And Fatu Anu projects as, a guy that can really play any position on the board. You did take a bunch of offensive line talent a couple years ago with Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, but at least in the short term, you could put Fatu Anu at guard. Maybe he kicks out to right tackle at some point in time, whatever the case is. I think he's definitely the best offensive lineman on the board.
I agree. And I think Fatu Anu, if you're a Seahawks fan, out of all the offensive linemen you can end up with this draft, I really do think that Fatu Anu is the best fit. The reason being it is because, like you said, they are relatively set at tackle. If you can get Troy Fatu Anu, who can play all 5 spots on the offensive line, that's extremely valuable. I think he could be a day one, maybe not all pro caliber, but potential Pro Bowl caliber interior offensive lineman with obviously that long-term upside if you do want to kick him out. Like you said, they do use that high capital on Charles Cross a couple years ago. They do have Abraham Lucas, although I think he was relatively banged up this year with some injuries. You're getting a guy like Fatu Anu who, like I said, you see him inside right away, and if Abe Lucas or Charles Cross miss time like they did last year, has that natural ability to play on the outside. So I really do feel like that's a great value pick at 16 for Seattle. I'm on the clock here with the Jaguars, and I believe the Raiders were at 13. I traded down, so I can honestly just grab them something too. Jaguars is tough because I really do feel like interior offensive lineman is in big play at this pick. The problem, of course, all these teams end up jumping him to get this interior offensive line. I think Mims is in play too, although he projects as a tackle rather than interior. So I think that might lean them off.
I think JPJ could go this high personally. As a Buccaneers fan who wants Jackson Powers Johnson like a hole in the head, I could see JPJ going this high though.
Let's spice it up. They maybe say, okay, we can draft a receiver, a complimentary receiver in the second round that maybe like a Keon Coleman to play the big body role that we need. Let's get
corner
Jackson
is the
Powers
other
Johnson.
position that they would maybe be considering here. Like, do you take Terry and Arnold while he's on the board there? I think they definitely could. But to me, JPJ really strikes me as somebody that the NFL is going to like more than the media. And I really love JPJ. Like, I see him mocked to the Buccaneers all the time. And every time I see it, I'm like, he is not going to be there at 26. I would love if he is, but I don't think he's going to be there. I think there's no way he gets through the gauntlet of Seattle, Jacksonville, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, and Miami. All of those teams could use interior offensive line help. And I would love him to fall to 26, but they're going to have to trade up if they want him, in my opinion, because he's a Senior Bowl guy, had a great week there. NFL teams really covet that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that analysis there. It kind of feels like, the only way he would fall would be the Tyler Linderbaum factor. But the fact is the NFL has learned from Tyler Linderbaum that maybe if a center is that good, we should probably value him as so. I mean, the other example is, of course, my team taking Travis Frederick in 2013. Sometimes when the center is good enough and you can project him to be an all-pro, you may as well just take him, because hitting on all-pros in the first-round pick is just as valuable than the positional upside pretty much. So like that, the Raiders, I think it's going to be pretty simple. I think at this point you trade down. Now you're afforded the opportunity to take your best defensive lineman. And to be honest, I can see that being Jer'Zhan Newton, Byron Murphy. We always go with Byron Murphy as the first D tackle off the board. I'm going to mix it up and go with Jer'Zhan Newton this time, because I really do think that it is a 1A, 1B situation.
Yeah, especially knowing that Newton hasn't really tested at all. Again, the people in the media forget about players easily when they're out of sight, out of mind. I mean, we just saw this with the current best available player on this board right now with Cooper DeJean. It's like once they do test, once they do get back into the public eye, then all of a sudden everybody's ready to put them back in the mock drafts. And in the eyes of the NFL, I would imagine Johnny Newton hasn't moved at all, despite, not testing and being out of sight, out of mind. So a lot of available options here for the Los Angeles Rams too. Like I think they have a lot of good needs on the board. Like
Arnold Murphy,
you got one of the top guys. You got some good corners here. What are you thinking?
I think it's Byron Murphy, to be honest. You just lose Aaron Donald. Why not get the guy that's been comped to Aaron Donald? Obviously, that is very optimistic thinking. I'm going to lose Aaron Donald and get the next Aaron Donald. But a lot of the same concerns people had for Aaron Donald when he was coming out in terms of size, in terms of can he hold up at the NFL level being a smaller player. That kind of applies to Byron Murphy, but the beauty of Byron
production with Donald would be the big difference.
Well, that too, but the beauty of Byron Murphy is Aaron Donald set the precedent for smaller defensive linemen going inside the top 20. When you are that gifted with your hands, that gifted as a mover, and still as strong as you are, which Byron Murphy represents, you're going to be valued a ton. I mean, your team just took a similar, pass rushing defensive tackle in the top 20 this year. And obviously, you've been saying all year how good he has looked. I really do feel like the NFL is adjusting to the fact that if we're taking these game-changing interior defensive linemen, especially what are the main schemes that have been paying off right now? It's been paying off the Raven scheme. Guess what? Why does Mike McDonald coveted in the NFL? Mike McDonald has coveted defensive linemen that are interchangeable and getting guys that can rush the passer from the inside, which I think Byron Murphy represents.
Yeah, and I mean, Madubuike just had a career year with Mike McDonald in that defense. Yeah, I'm going to retire anybody ever comparing undersized DT to Aaron Donald, because he's like probably the best defensive player I've ever seen in my life. Easily. So going forward, we're going to compare them to Kalijah Cansey. Like you said, the Buccaneers took him in the first round last year, also went to the University of Pittsburgh, and he had a great rookie season. So if you get a Kalijah Cansey caliber player out of Byron Murphy, and I watch both guys quite intently because that's my favorite college team and my favorite NFL team, I do see a lot of similarities in their game there. So I'm on the board here with the Steelers, and they would be ecstatic to get Terrion Arnold at this spot. I know they took Joey Porter last year, but when you're an NFL team, you stack your board based on talent. And to me, Terrion Arnold has absolutely no business being on the board at 20th overall.
Oh, I completely agree. And funny enough, I mean, the factor last year when they got Joey Porter in the second round, like it always feels like a falling value falls to the Steelers. So if this mock draft ended up actually happening, like it'd be hilarious. You got the familiarity there. Obviously, Alabama with Minkah Fitzpatrick, he can fit in like a glove seamlessly from a culture standpoint. Honestly, I'd have no issues. And realistically, pairing him next to Joey Porter Jr. for the foreseeable future could be potentially one of the best cornerback duos in the league. So love the Terrion Arnold pick. I'm on the clock here with the Dolphins. And with Jackson Powers-Johnson off the board, you could go, an offensive tackle to develop in like Amarius Mims, which I think is in play. Something that I never see kind of mocked. And again,
I would like to make a trade for what it's worth if you're open to it.
I could be down. I'm between trade. I'm between Jared Verse, and I'm between another option with Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, those would be fun, man. If you want to get fun and give him Xavier Worthy, you can. I know that both the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and probably also I
think the Cowboys would be interested.
The Eagles would probably be interested in potentially coming up for Cooper DeJean or Liatu Latu. The Bucs, I think the Bucs are in love with both players. I think Liatu Latu and Cooper DeJean would be a huge fit for both teams. And I could see Jason Light pocketing that extra third round pick from the Carlton Davis trade, sending away 26, sending away the 30 got from Detroit, and going up and getting Liatu Latu right here.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. So what, 26 and 92 for 21? I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah, it seems pretty fair. I mean, again, maybe they throw in like a late round pick swap. It's not really important. We're not going to do the whole draft in here. Maybe they throw in a 4 next year or something like that. Jason Light doesn't make moves to accumulate draft capital unless he has something in mind for it. And the last time he did this, the Buccaneers traded up for Tristan Wirfs. So part of me believes that between Leatu Latu, Cooper DeJean, and Jackson Powers Johnson, I believe those are the 3 players the Bucs would absolutely love to add. Whoever's falling, I believe, will be potentially a trade-up candidate in this like 19 to 22 range, depending on who wants to trade down. So Buccaneers slide up here and they take Leatu Latu. They need edge help badly. Yaya Diaby was a nice surprise in the 3rd round. You have JTS, who hasn't really worked out as a late first-round pick, but he was a raw guy coming out. It's possible that he still has some development to be had. I think Latu is the best pass rusher in this draft had he been healthy. It's just that Dallas Turner has a little bit more of a clean projection coming from the bigger school. No medical concerns, tested really well. But Leatu Latu, definitely a talented player. And probably, honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if the NFL took him way higher than this, just knowing his medicals. We don't know him, obviously, so people are projecting him to slide.
Yeah, no, I dig that. And there's another potential trade I want to negotiate here. The Philadelphia Eagles, they have a number of guys I feel like they would be comfortable with, whether it's a corner, whether it's a Cooper DeJean, whether it's a tackle, whether it's interior offensive lineman. I feel like they're comfortable with some of this board, especially when it relates to what could be there at 29. The reason why I suggest that is if the Detroit Lions see Jared Verse available at the 22 spot, I feel like they would be aggressive in trying to make a move out for him.
Really? You think the Lions would go up for an edge?
I think so, because I mean, if I'm looking at their depth chart right now, obviously Aiden Hutchinson is your franchise #1 edge, but outside of that, Marcus Davenport, John Kaminsky, this guy Mitchell Lagood, I've never heard of in my life. Like, you need a true #2 edge rusher, and I think Davenport is a really solid, Dante Fowler, Dorrance Armstrong, #3 for your team. But if you can get a true, difference-making edge to pair next to Aiden Hutchinson and have Davenport come in on rust packages, I really do feel like that betters your chances at competing with the NFC's top teams. And I just don't feel like you're going to get that type of comparable edge at 29. So I really do think they'd be interested in moving up.
Yeah, I mean, you control both teams. Well, I guess I control the Philadelphia Eagles here. Yeah, let's do it. You know what? Let's do it. Because Jared Verse also sneakily a slightly older player, probably ready to play right away, probably ready to make an impact to his NFL team. So let's take 29 and 73 and send it over to the Philadelphia Eagles for 22 here. Eagles are a notorious trade back team, collect picks. They probably are going to take, somebody on the board. The corner class a little deeper at this point in the board too. So if they're looking for a defensive back, maybe they don't see a huge difference between Cooper DeJean and Nate Wiggins, Kool-Aid McKinstry, and those type of guys that are still on the board there. So yeah, let's give him Jared Verse, last of the top three edge rushers, the big 3 edge rushers that everyone's talking about. All of these guys kind of bring something different to the table. But Jared Verse he kind of profiles too as like your solidified, solid #2 edge rusher. Maybe he doesn't have #1 edge rusher upside like Turner and Leatu have, but I think he's probably the more safe of the 3 of those guys too. So I could see the Lions being like, we need a contributor right away. Our defensive line needs some help. Let's go get Verse.
And I mean, speaking of, defensive players, you mentioned this guy potentially being available at the last pick for the Buccaneers to potentially take. But if you're the Chargers and you can get Malik Neighbors to help your offense, and then you can get Cooper DeJean to run your back end of your defense, that'd be really fun. I think I'll gauge you here because I think they can go tackle. I think they can go Cooper DeJean. I think they can go, to be honest, those are probably the main 2, I would say, because you got your receiver at 8. I'll let you lean here.
I think they would take J.C. Latham, personally.
I like it. That's a good pick.
I know you might have wanted him for Dallas, but I think J.C. Latham would probably be the pick for them there. I mean, we've heard Harbaugh talk about offensive line play a ton. They could use a right tackle. J.C. Latham played right tackle. I also think it's not without the range of outcomes that they actually would consider him at 11 too. If they didn't trade back up for Neighbors, I could see them taking him as high as 11.
Funny enough, in the Cowboys spot, I was really indifferent with whatever offensive lineman fell between Latham, between Mims, between Barton. Latham goes here. I think Mims is the next best natural tackle fit. And I don't know how the Cowboys view this, but my philosophy is that when you have an all-pro player at left guard, making him transition back to tackle is not the play that you should do. So for me personally, Tyler Smith is my future at left guard. A lot of people want to move him the tackle, like I said, but if he's so good at guard, I am not moving him off there. Let him be the next Zach Martin. Let him be a future, a Pro Bowl, Hall of Fame caliber interior offensive lineman, and don't try to get, slightly above average tackle play out of him. I think Amarius Mims has as high of an upside as any tackle in this class, can be your future at left tackle. And I really do feel like if the Cowboys saw the traits that he represents, they would run to the podium and take him.
Yeah. The thing that sketches me out about Mims is the lack of play experience for a team that basically needs a starter immediately. It's like you probably would have been better off with somebody with more experience, but at the same time, it makes some sense. They could be a team sneakily that could trade up in the first round if Fashanu specifically, because Fashanu has a lot of experience, started slipping into the mid-teens and say the Saints and Colts or whatever passed on him, getting ahead of the Jaguars, getting ahead of some of those other teams would make some sense for the Cowboys if they wanted to go out and secure. They're all in, according to Mike McCarthy and Jerry Jones. So I don't know. To me, Mims is a little bit sketchy. He's a little bit more of a boomer bust prospect, but again, the measurables and the size are something you just can't teach, right? And offensive line development has been a Cowboys thing. They've been able to develop their linemen, Tyler Smith being a prime example of that. So definitely don't mind the pick there.
For sure. And now at this pick with the Packers, this just seems like a Packers. But could you, if you closed your eyes and you heard the name Cooper DeJean wearing the Packers colors, does that not just seem seamless fit?
I'm very scared, to be honest. Like I told you, my Buccaneers play, if they stay at 26, my 3 Buccaneers players that I want are Latu, Cooper DeJean, and Jackson Powers Johnson. I wouldn't be shocked if those guys were picked 23, 24, and 25 in the draft. The Packers taking DeJean, you guys taking Jackson Powers Johnson, and the 23 pick of the Vikings, if they currently, like if they stay there or whatever, or even if they trade down, and that team taking Latu. So regardless, yes, I can see Cooper DeJean in a Green Bay Packers uniform. And I think the flexibility on the back end, they've coveted that. And they've also just invested in the secondary a lot in the first round. So I could see them just continuing to do that.
For sure. Now we're back to the Dolphins, and I think I mentioned Worthy at the 21 pick. You can go Worthy or Graham Barton. I think those are the 2 names that I want to mix in here. You want to have some fun and go some Worthy?
Let's go with Xavier Worthy, dude. This would be so fun. I think the rationale here, if anybody's like, and he's completely buried down the board, which is ridiculous because every major draft analyst has him a little bit higher than this. PFF's a little lower on Worthy. The thing with Xavier Worthy is he's a young player. He has some work to do, but he fits your offense perfectly. I mean, this is the track team of all track teams that you have here. And Tyreek Hill has talked about retiring after this year. 2 years ago, he said, I want to play 2 more years in the NFL and then I want to retire. So if you have an ability to work in Xavier Worthy slowly behind Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, then Jalen Waddle, he'll probably be up for his contract next year. You'll have to pay Jalen Waddle and you have Xavier Worthy on his rookie deal. And you have the same exact offense that you had with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, assuming that Tyreek Hill hangs it up and moves on into the sunset. And my literal comp for Xavier Worthy is Jalen Waddle. So I think he's a great fit for the offense, and he also would be a ton of fun too. Let's just build out a track team. We know Mike McDaniel loves speed.
Yeah, I mean, just the speed motion element alone. Could you imagine not having to have Xavier Worthy with a pressed up release at any point in his NFL career? Because guess what? Mike McDaniel would make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mike McDaniel would probably sign like Devontae Parker, put him at X receiver, drawing number 1 corners, and never put Xavier Worthy or Jalen Waddle in that position ever. Just rotate them out, Z receiver slot only, and you just let whatever X receiver you sign, a Corey Davis type, a Devontae Parker type, just draw number 1 corners the entire season, pretty much. I really like the fit there of Xavier Worthy.
I mean, hell, they may just end up with MVS because he's fast and just run third level at X.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
For sure. We're back on the clock here with the Cardinals, and I mentioned run to the podium type of pick before, but Graham Barton feels like such a good fit for the Cardinals. You get that interior offensive lineman. You build that offensive line. You took Paris Johnson last year, and their starting center last year, I believe, was Hajalte Froholt. You get Graham Barton, who's got that realistic, like people always say, oh, he could play any position on the offensive line. Like Graham Barton can play any position on the offensive line. And a lot of the analysts I trust, I respect the most, probably say his best position is probably guard or center. So plug him in there. You can play him any one of those 3 positions, left guard, center, or right guard, and you're getting a potential future 5 to 10 year type of starter.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Good, smart trench pick. Makes sense there. You basically, the net of that Houston trade up with Will Anderson was 2 offensive linemen, and you helped build out your offensive line. So Buffalo Bills, I mean, just bring up the wide receiver board because we all know that's the direction that they're going. The question here is, what kind of receiver do they go after? To me, this would be a concerning mistake, in my opinion. I wouldn't say mistake, but this would concern me as a rookie drafter, because we know the steam that Adonai Mitchell would get if he were selected by the Buffalo Bills. However, what did we just talk about with Brian Thomas Jr.? Athleticism, size, played in big school games. He scored a touchdown in every college football playoff game he ever played in. This is the type of dude the NFL will really like, even though his profile scares the living shit out of me as a dynasty rookie draft person, especially knowing that he would be the consensus 109, 108 if this were to happen. Adonai Mitchell, in my opinion, needs to go to a situation where he's not expected to be the number one wide receiver right away, because I don't think he's ready. But at the same time, he's going to be playing with Josh Allen. Maybe it's rough going early on in the season, and Curtis Samuel and some of the other veterans there can get him up to speed. Regardless, Adonai Mitchell to the Bills, it feels very, very likely of happening.
I have to run this by you because obviously we are a dynasty channel. If you guys are new to the channel and you're coming for the NFL draft content, you guys play fantasy, obviously that is our main focus. Talking about it from a dynasty fantasy football lens, do you think Adonai Mitchell 28 to Buffalo would go higher? Or do you think JJ McCarthy, any spot other than Minnesota, goes higher?
I think Mitchell would go higher than McCarthy, but in this situation, McCarthy did go to Minnesota, so I would take McCarthy over him. The interesting thing would be knowing that in this situation, we got Worthy to the Dolphins, we got Mitchell to the Bills, and we got McCarthy to the Vikings. That would make for late first-round picks of the rookie draft being a lot more valuable than they currently are right now. So, yeah, Mitchell to the Bills just makes too much sense to me. It worries me for Adonai Mitchell's sake. As a Texas fan, I could tell you right now, he's not ready to be your number one wide receiver, but you have Dalton Kincaid there who could take a big step up in year two. Maybe this is kind of like a retooling year for Buffalo. They're not a AFC championship bound team. They just kind of sneak into the playoffs, get their young players some development.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like Josh Allen's probably going to get you to the playoffs anyways, but maybe they're like a 10-7, 11-6 team rather than the juggernaut they've been in recent years. I can see that. Speaking of teams that have been good in recent years, obviously the Eagles have been, a really good franchise. At least, I mean, if you're talking about pure record, them, the Chiefs, the Cowboys have the best pure record in the last 2 years of football. So a lot of success. They do need a corner. Two big time corners end up falling to them. Knowing their history with the SEC, I would lean they go Kool-Aid over Nate, but I can be convinced either way between Nate and Kool-Aid.
I think their secondary is slow and old. So I kind of like the idea of giving them Wiggins to get some speed in their secondary. Obviously ran in the 4.2s before blowing his hammy out at the combine. So I actually like the idea of giving them Wiggins. It also sets up the Ravens to potentially take an Alabama player too, which is a nice byproduct. But yeah, I think that Nate Wiggins makes a lot of sense for the Eagles, and they might feel, we had them trading down in this scenario. Nate Wiggins could have been their pick at 22, but they moved down and still get a guy that was probably high on their board to begin with.
For sure. And I mean, speaking of, like you said, I think Kool-Aid McKinstry, if he fell to the Ravens, would be such a Ravens pick, but it obviously is your pick, so I'll let you kind of adjust the board.
Yeah, Ladd McConkey would definitely be in consideration here too, because of the connection you have with Todd Monken there. I think we all thought that getting Lamar Jackson, a big-bodied playmaker, would be a good fit, but the number one guy that's hit for them has been the separator that Zay Flowers is. Yeah. So why build your receiver core like a basketball team when you have your power forward in your tight ends? So you don't need to grab a big wide receiver to go along with Zay Flowers. Just play small ball in the front court and let your tight ends do in the back court and let your tight ends do the front court work. So we're going to give him Ladd McConkey here. I think they're going to love the connection. They're going to know his character, obviously, because the offensive coordinator of the Ravens coached Ladd McConkey in college as well. Had his best season, in fact, actually in 2022 when Todd Monken was there. So again, 6 receivers in the first round, or is that how many we got? Or we got 7 in the first round?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3 with Worthy,
Thomas, and the other 3
Thomas
already. Right. Too. So we got 7 receivers in the first round, but that's how good this class is, man. I think all 7 of these guys belong to go in the first round. Even though Adonai Mitchell, I'm a little bit worried about, he definitely has the tools to go in the first round. So you're on the board here with the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, and I think you can argue Kool-Aid here with the falling value, but I really do love the fit of Zach Frazier on this offensive line. The reason why I'm saying this, obviously we know with the San Francisco run scheme, they love their outside zone. They love athletic offensive linemen that can get their reach blocks. According to the analysts I trust the most on offensive line play, Zach Frazier is one of the best at reach blocking on 3-techs in this entire class. Like, plugged into his West Virginia film is him being able to do that at a very high rate, and not a lot of centers can do that consistently. So I can see Kyle Shanahan seeing the skill set that Zach Frazier has, knowing that the main reason why they lost the Super Bowl last year was probably due to their offensive line play, and plugging in a potential starter at offensive line for the next 10 years. I really do feel like Zach Frazier has that type of potential. Whether you play him at center, whether you play him along at the guard position, I really do feel like he's going to be a plus level starter on a team that realistically, outside of Trent Williams, needs plus level play on their offensive line. So I think Zach Frazier is a great fit.
Yeah, with Zach Frazier, I mean, you need talent on your offensive line. Outside of Trent Williams, who's old as hell, you have no talent. Your scheme is going to cover things up because you're the 49ers, but you do need some more injection of talent there. And they've put a priority on the center position with guys like Alex Mack and stuff in years past with this scheme. So definitely like that fit. I think this is a screaming Kool-Aid McKinstry spot for the Kansas City Chiefs here. You traded away L'Jarius Sneed. Trent McDuffie's going to need some money soon as well. I'm sure you're going to pay him, but at the same time, getting an injection of youth on that in that secondary, you don't get the opportunity if you're Kansas City there to grab a top receiver because 7 of them went in front of you in this draft. So you don't reach, you just take the best player available there. And in Kool-Aid McKinstry, you're going to have to address the receiver position elsewhere. But that's why you signed Marquise Brown, right? Because you might have thought, hey, we might get screwed at wide receiver. We don't want to take Keon Coleman or whatever the next ranked receiver is at 32 overall when we could just take, the best available player that's sliding to us because 7 receivers went in front of us.
Yeah, for sure. I obviously the trade of LJ Sneed opens up this opportunity a lot more versus when you had him on your roster, and then you could say, well, we have 2 of the top corners. Not having him on your roster here, getting that cost-controlled rookie cornerback is going to be very valuable for a team that views themselves as a dynasty. They've won 3 Super Bowls. How do they win 3 Super Bowls? Because you're able to take those high-paid veterans and turn them into productive young players. I mean, Trent McDuffie, you could have said the time that they took him, they didn't really need a cornerback that badly. And obviously Trent McDuffie now ends up being one of the top 3 to 5 players on their defense on a championship roster.
Yeah, exactly. And this year they needed their defense to play at a high level because their offense wasn't playing at a high level. And if you don't secure a top receiver, investing in your defense makes some sense. So this is the mock draft. You guys can see it on the screen there. Obviously, we're not going to run through the whole thing. I'll say what my favorite pick is if you want to say what your favorite pick is. Yep. My favorite pick in this mock draft, I think, is the Terry and Arnold pick to the Steelers. I think I love their idea of pairing him with another young corner there and Joey Porter Jr. Like you said, the Steelers, Ravens, some of these teams, they just get gift wrapped good players falling to them in the draft year after year. And Terry and Arnold getting to be the duo corner for Joey Porter would be mighty, mighty fun for that Steelers defense.
Yeah, and if I'm saying my favorite pick from a value standpoint, I really do love the Bengals going out, being aggressive, trading up for Olu Fashanu. I personally still feel like he is tackle 2 in this class. I think you can make the case that he could even be over Joe Alt if you prioritize that top end upside. I really do feel like he's that type of player. Honestly, I mean, it's funny that we end up losing this guy this offseason, but I really do feel like if Olu Fashanu can live up to that high end upside, a Tyron Smith type of player, and given the athletic traits, given the experience that he has at such a young age, would be the comp, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Danny said throughout the video, if you guys are not dynasty players or you are dynasty players and you never heard of us before and you found us through this mock draft, hit the subscribe button down below, leave a like down below as well. Check out everything that we're doing. If you guys want access to all of our grading, all of our rookie prospects, we don't grade offensive linemen and defensive linemen, but we do grade these offensive skill players for dynasty fantasy football purposes. So if you want to check that out, link down below in the description to our site, flockfantasy.com. You can use the promo code FSE, get a 7-day free trial, check out everything that you need to check out, 30% off any of the packages. We also have our My Teams feature, which is now live beta stages where you can load your team in. You can see your team, how we grade all of your players. How does it stack up versus the rest of your league mates? Do you have the 3rd best team in your league? Do you have the 9th best team in your league? And of course, we have our dynasty trade calculator, all of our rankings, tons of content over there that you guys are going to want to check out. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.